To know and not to know, to be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies, to hold simultaneously two opinions which cancel out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing in both of them, to use logic against logic, to repudiate morality while laying claim to it, to forget whatever it was necessary to forget, and then to draw it back into memory again at the moment when it was needed, and then promptly to forget it again, and above all, to apply the same process to the process itself. That was the ultimate subtlety, consciously to induce unconsciousness, and then, once again, to become unconscious of the act of hypnosis you had just performed. Even to understand the word, doublethink, involved the use of doublethink. Doublethink is one of the core premises of Orwell's more than famous 1984, the consciously unconscious act of thinking and not thinking all at once. It's how citizens stay safe from the party and their thought police, the iron fist of Big Brother which takes post-World War II Soviet culture to its horrifying extremes by removing all aspects of the individual. No friends, no time, no sex, not even feelings, literally removed in thought crime, enforced by the thought police who are claimed to know everything you think. And yet, in the same breath, doublethink is not simply a tool to evade the party, but also how it maintains and justifies itself. It can take a man with nothing but vigor and the urge to resist and be himself in a world without self, and reduce him to nothing more than a body which immortalizes concepts, a vessel for ideology and power for the sake of power. It's a concept which makes little sense under traditional logic and seems to summarize to hypocrisy. Think whatever one wants to be happiest at that moment, whatever justifies a fragile ego. But I believe this is somewhat of a misunderstanding, and with doublethink as a mirror to the real-world situations which sees the welcomed rise of authoritarians once more, it's important that we try to remove that misunderstanding as much as possible. This thought process is not hypocrisy, it is not deception, it is not tossing aside inconvenient facts, it is not holding contradiction within one's mind to believe whatever they want. It is doing those things, going through that process, because that is how one truly believes happily in anything, a sort of ultimate bliss. The salvation of the fragile human mind where nothing can present a challenge, nothing can create uncomfortable fact to face, nothing can tear down that weakness one holds ever again, because what they believe in is both everything and nothing at once, morphing to each and every shape to maintain constant and unyielding bliss. Now, this concept is one which relies on the extent of human reasoning where common sense stops being as applicable. The way that Winston, the main character of the novel, describes doublethink in that opening quote we used can also be stated as nothing is everything. This shorter summary might make things easier to grasp, although stick with me because it's still going to be a bit of an odd explanation. Now, imagine a space with nothing in it. There's no sound, no touch, no sight, no smell. It is devoid of anything at all. Is this space light or dark? Setting aside the technicality of photons, there is no effective difference between whether it's light or dark. If it is entirely illuminated, so that everything is only pure white, and there's no context for that light to matter. There are no shapes to discern, and so it may as well not exist. This creates the same result as a space entirely without light, because that pitch black area is similarly devoid of the important context. Both of these things, entire light and the entire lack of it, are experienced the same. Nothing is also everything. So we can then apply this to the famous expression in 1984 of 2 plus 2 equals 5, or 3 or 4 or whatever it needs to be. Now, we all hold the knowledge within ourselves that 2 plus 2 definitively equals 4. That fact anchors us in reality because, well, it's undeniably true. Now, the words 2 and 4 are simply human labels, things we made up. But if I have this amount and I combine them, I get this distinct amount. We could say this sentence in any number of forms. We could say 7 plus 7 equals 18, or blue plus blue equals green, but the relationship is the same independent of the labels. The world of physics still operates under its principles, and we in its turn. The math is a fact. That small equation actually says a lot. However, that not being a fact actually means that one knows more because they know less. Now, say you don't know what 2 plus 2 equals, then whatever you're told it equals is the correct answer. You know that it makes 3 and 4 and 5 and every single number on the line at once. From knowing nothing, allowing information only to pass through and never to stick, you actually know everything in the instant that it's needed to know anything. So as long as one continues to know nothing, then they will always be correct. This is why doublethink can create an ultimate state of bliss of sorts. It's the simplest state, almost a default of sorts, which achieves the feeling of the most complex one. Those engaging in it are not hypocrites and liars, because they don't even know that a contradiction exists to begin with. Now, that expresses how it's good for the individual's happiness. However, the party is quite blunt in stating that this isn't their motivation, seen in this interaction where Winston is asked to guess their goals. You're ruling over us for our own good. You believe that human beings are not fit to govern themselves. That was stupid, Winston, stupid. You should know better than to say a thing like that. He continued, the party seeks power entirely for its own sake. We are not interested in the good of others. We are interested solely in power. Power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. The object of persecution is persecution. The object of torture is torture. The object of power is power. Now do you begin to understand me? So, without the usual, the ends justify the means, why is this something that a selfish entity would go to such great lengths to create? Why give its citizens what can almost truly be called bliss and yet state that it's selfish? Well, we have to apply its underlying logic. Nothing is everything to people. The party is constantly seeking to remove individuality. They've turned sex into a mechanical act and will one day seek a more Brave New World style solution. They consume all the citizens' free times at the community centers, and by having them have to deal with these terrible living situations and scarcity, using their time just to survive. And their principle of newspeak is an attempt at one day reducing the entire dictionary, all of the words, down to a single, all-encompassing one, so that no one can ever express a unique thought again. They require that everyone be the same, because that means that they get to live forever. Let's explain. If everyone is the same, specifically in thought rather than body or, say, external situations for reasons we'll cover later, then there's no context to distinguish them from someone else. If Winston thinks the same as Julia, expresses those thoughts in the same words as her, and has no different friends than her to create different thoughts, is there anything within their consciousness which actually creates distinct beings? Just like our example, which involved the two voids, in lacking context, these two people become the same. If everyone works under the same authoritarian ideal, each person ceases to be their own entity and becomes just one node in the network of the same thought process. If Big Brother makes everyone think like Big Brother, then everyone is effectively Big Brother. And so long as Big Brother thinks, Big Brother exists. and it simulates immortality. The bodies of the individuals who exhibit it will die. However, the concept itself, the true entity which they're one with, carries on forever. Their shell is gone, but an exact mirror of their mind lives on. Everyone who joins it finds an ultimate comfort in that they will never really die. By doubting their own memories, their own experiences, their own everything, by holding a belief only in the exact moment and knowing nothing else, there's no evidence to prove this false, and so it persists. One is all. It's the comfort not of thinking as one wishes, but not even being able to think to begin with. Not of being an individual, but of ceasing to be one, to be dead. But death is comfort because it lacks change. It is eternal stagnation, a perfected state where one is unchallenged until the end of time, unable to live or to die, to love or to lose, to hope or despair. It is the endless white, a peace unknown and comfort unfounded. A torturous man can admit this openly to the one he tortures, for when the process is done, he will have only tortured himself. The selfish act is done in service of the only person to exist, and so it is justified. The individual only has power so long as he ceases to be an individual. Alone, free, the human being is always defeated. It must be so because every human being is doomed to die, which is the greatest of all failures. But if he can make complete, utter submission, if he can escape from his identity, if he can merge himself in the party so that he is the party, then he is all-powerful and immortal. The logic of nothing is everything is insanity. It reverses the most known things to paradoxical extremes, and it is at odds with what we experience in the real world, which is why the point is to reduce things to concepts. If one is entirely convinced of a supposed real world, a physical reality which truly exists, then they can never love Big Brother, because then there is situation, there is upbringing, there is sensation, there is evidence against the concepts. It's a physical reality where rocks buffet winds, where cars use gas to drive up hills, where people eat and sleep and drink to be able to walk. In essence, it's a world where nothing is free. All things require a give and take. Some things exist, and because they do, others can't, and that means there is no nothing to be everything. And this is something the party admits, that they can't control physical reality. Power is power over human beings, over the body, but above all, over the mind. Power over matter, external reality, as you would call it, is not important. Already, our control over matter is complete. We control matter because we control the mind. They can't truly shift that physical reality. They have no power over Earth and the stars. But they have all the power over how people perceive that world, and as such the only way we know it. As long as things are conceptual, all things are theirs. And this is a point they make with extreme brutality, proving it to those who disobey in shocking fashion. I've tried to avoid real spoilers up to this point, so I highly suggest you go read this work first before continuing the video. Because the moment you witness how what I'm about to spoil comes to be, you won't be able to put this down, and the experience will be one you remember as a prime example of the power stories can hold. But I'll continue on for those who've either read it or simply want a video and not a novel. The brutal point is made when O'Brien, who Winston believed was a member of the Resistance, an underground group against Big Brother, actually leads to his capture and eventual torture at his hands. It's a process of an undisclosed amount of time where druggings keep him in a delirious state, and a lack of darkness or windows makes him lose all sense of time. He's starved, beaten, and berated until those things constitute his entire reality, and he's made to confess to any and every possible crime. With that first blow on the elbow, the nightmare had started. Later, he was to realize that all that then happened was merely a preliminary. There was a long range of crimes, espionage, sabotage, and the like, to which everyone had to confess as a matter of course. The confession was a formality, though the torture was real. Always there were 5 or 6 men in black uniforms at him simultaneously. Sometimes it was fists, sometimes it was truncheons, sometimes it was steel rods, and sometimes it was boots. There were times where it went on and on until the cruel, wicked, unforgivable thing seemed to him not that the guards continued to beat him, but that he could not force himself into losing consciousness. O'Brien's job is then to take that demolished body, a part of reality they can never fully control, and use that to destroy the mind, the world that they can, creating someone who is truly capable of lugging Big Brother. This relies on Winston's experience and how his perception in this facility without context comes to create a contradiction. Now, Winston has lived his whole life as a man, as a human. He's made love to someone mechanically and also out of desperation and also out of passion. He's eaten food that he's hated and had chocolate from his mother that he loved. He's grown up in his body and experienced its changes and capabilities. He knows from physical evidence that he is a man existing in a world which has influenced him in his life. There is nowhere near an exact definition of a man to place on himself, but if you ask him what he is, that will be his reply. However, he hasn't seen himself in anywhere from weeks to months to years during all of this torture. The only image he has of himself, the one he judges himself by and places upon him in this world, is within his mind now, detached from physicality by beatings and starvations and time. And so, O'Brien uses this to show him that the mind creates reality rather than reality creating the mind. He pulls the beaten, broken man up to a mirror where Winston can see his whole body for the first time in any amount of time, and what he witnesses is a shriveled husk. "You are the last man," said O'Brien. "You are the guardian of human spirit. You shall see yourself as you are." There was a 3-sided mirror at the far end of the room. He approached it and then stopped short. An involuntary cry had broken out of him. He stopped because he was frightened. A bowed, gray-colored, skeleton-like thing was coming towards him. He moved closer to the glass. The creature's face seemed to be protruded because of its bent carriage. A forlorn jailbird's face with a knobby forehead running back into a bald scalp, a crooked nose, and battered-looking cheekbones. Certainly it was his own face, but it seemed to him that it had changed more than he had changed inside. The emotions that it registered would be different from the ones he felt. "Look at the condition you are in," he said. "Look at this filthy grime all over your body. Look at the dirt between your toes. Look at the disgusting running sore on your leg. I could snap your neck like a carrot. Even your hair is coming out in handfuls. You are rotting away. You are falling to pieces. What are you? A bag of filth. Do you see that thing facing you? That is the last man. If you are human, that is humanity." Winston believed he was a man. He had an image of a man for himself in his head, and it affected how he acted, how he resisted. He fought because he was human, goddammit, and humans persist. But seeing himself as something which can no longer be called a man, he's broken even further, realizing that his resistance was built upon the very thing they were trying to make him believe, that his thoughts created reality. His world was shaped only in his head. His is simply a concept. As O'Brien triumphantly stated, "This is the last man. If you are human, then this is humanity." Because there is no such thing as a man. There is only the belief in such a thing. And he was the only one to believe it. This further feeds the idea of immortality because of how these concepts are detached from physical reality, from a truly observable world. A man experiences many things, namely scarcity and limitation, the principles of a real physical world. For him to eat, resources are taken from elsewhere. As we said, exactly because one thing exists, another doesn't, or at least has a harder time doing so. This includes humans. Because certain diseases exist which require death to perpetuate themselves, his reality can end. Because he grows old and weak to make room for new men, his reality ends. Because a rock might fall to occupy the same place in space that he was in and strikes his head, his reality can end. Physical things in a physical world are susceptible. They can be and are guaranteed to be taken away at one point or another. But the idea of a man, that can exist independently of all those dangers. It can exist at the same time as the disease and the old age and the rock, and in fact, it must exist at the same time. So long as someone creates it in that infinite space, it persists. And so the party doesn't give up reality for perception simply because it's easier, but because it's better. It's isolated, it's sure, it's nothing and everything. We control matter because we control the mind. They are believed to control reality, and they do. Just as a man thinks himself into being a man, they think themselves into being a god, and it's so. They continue to create their endless war, producing products only to have them wasted on conflict where the same territories are changed again and again, where nothing truly changes, where nothing adds nor subtracts value, where their concept exists eternal, and no one dies and everyone is perfected in death. They believe and people believe, and it is in their ultimate interest to believe. This is the endless, greatest pleasure one can ever know. The logic of doublethink is terrifying to the core. The way that it so easily justifies everything, that it defeats hypocrisy and does so eternally, that it proves everything and yet can't be disproven, and how in all of that it is unchanging forever pleasure. That when someone truly cedes to it, there will be no reason to ever consider otherwise, and that its control can be so perfect and so welcomed. And that leads me to wonder how we defend against it. How do we prevent ourselves from falling into what's actually an inherent, blissful trap of our own human logic? Now, 1984 does provide some insight on this, creating a distinction between two sides. One which is born from feeling in Winston and his love Julia, and one which is born from thinking in the party. Now, the former two obviously don't succeed from what we've already covered. However, we'll address why this is later, which makes a different point and furthers some others. For now, we simply want to learn the validity of their side in their actions. And to do that, we have to understand a sort of distinction between thinking and feeling, which requires being a bit pedantic about the colloquial use of terms and kind of defining them for our own use here today. Now, feeling is often used to describe how we are going to emotionally react to a situation. We'll sit down and process something and talk about how we feel. However, that is kind of where it mixes with thinking. In this situation, at least, we have to think of a feeling as a passive act, more raw and immediate. It's more directly tied to experiencing a reaction to the physical world around oneself. It's like listening to that song that you love and feeling goosebumps when it hits the most dramatic part. It's that immediate and intense recoil from a cut or a burn. It's running your fingers along a lover's skin and noticing how the curves meet and depart as you develop a nice rhythm. You don't actively consider all of these things. There's no delay where, after touching a hot stove, you sit and process, oh, this temperature has increased from normal, from what I can handle, I should remove my hand from it. As such, a feeling is actually quite definite. Even if you can't pin it down, even if it's a long chain of cause and effect that's hard to understand, it is there for a reason, and it is felt as the individual inherently feels it, and you can't do much about that. It is, in some ways, you more as you are meant to be and crafted, unfiltered and raw. A feeling is not just uncontrollable, but it is uncontrolled individualism in a sense. It is the unbounded self interpreting the world in its unique way, an equation still, but one so complex it's essentially unsolvable. Now we consider thought to see why this is actually what Big Brother wants, the other side of this equation. Thought is more active. It's the reason or the logic that you apply to that immediate feeling. You could say that you moved your hand because the stove was hot, or that actually no, it was not hot, I have never done a single wrong thing in my life, or that you felt that because God was angry at you for touching a sacred object and that warmth was what you felt, their reaction to it. Or you could just say that, well, red is a nifty color for metal to turn. The point is, you can think anything and everything about it. Its logic can originate from anywhere across the entire earth and maybe even beyond. It's actually much less definite than a feeling because it adds every layer of social conditioning and context onto that already complex person. It's how you learn to treat the wound left from the burn, and what people told you about how to control the pain instead of the actual feeling itself. It's a reaction to the reaction based on what you've been taught in your history, in your context, and much more. As such, it includes the self, but also dilutes it. It is passed through you, but not originating in you. Now, this is the contrast between feeling and thinking that's so important for Big Brother. In a way, nature versus nurture. One is inherently you, and the other is what you've learned is you. Now, one final way to think about it is this, that example of two voids, the thought of experiencing nothingness and everythingness. It's, well, just that, it's a thought of experience. It could well be that nothingness has a different feel than everythingness. Maybe one is warm and one is cold. Maybe one is terror and one is bliss. However, since it's impossible for us to both experience and communicate those things, we have to rely only on what we imagine the feeling to be. We're beholden to what we think, not what we feel when we dig into these non-common sense extremes. And this is why, despite having something called thought crime, the intent of Big Brother is to encourage thought in a way and prevent feeling. From having the posters which announce Big Brother's omnipresence all the time, the constant and unyielding threat of the thought police, the telescreens in every home which can let someone analyze your expressions, literally the most basic expression of feeling that we struggle to control, through all of these things, they create an environment where no one is able to truly feel. Everything is first passed through the filter that the party has put in place, the nurture and not the nature, where it is pre-processed and then reacted to in those carefully chosen ways where you work around the thought police and Big Brother. Everyone has to act as spies would, which we see with Winston and Julia. They only meet because she fakes a fall so that when he would naturally go to help her up, as any good comrade would, she can deposit a note in his hand. And then he has to get back to his desk and go through a whole process of secretly reading it, and to his surprise, it expresses that she's in love with him. It's based on nothing more than vibes, the extreme subtleties of his character and the test of him stopping to help her up. But that's all they have to judge each other on. They watch each other from the corners of their eyes and make decisions based on a glance that lingers for just a microsecond too long, or a walk that inspires confidence. Their judgments and their connections are an act of desperately trying to pull feelings from a world of thought. As we see with Winston, it's become natural for everyone to maintain the same expression at all times even. Everyone's showcasing a feeling in an external way, which is why they have to do this. For example, even as he's called out on the telescreen during morning exercises for not working hard enough, a terribly frightening experience and a moment of public shame, this is his only reaction. His face remained completely inscrutable, never showed dismay, never showed resentment. A single flicker of the eyes could give you away. And after so long of that, those feelings themselves would start to slip away. And they do. Winston can kick the severed hand of a bomb victim into the gutter and hardly feel a thing. Everyone is constantly in the cycle of abusable human logic rather than true experience. And it's with this barrier up that Big Brother gains its power. But this is also why Winston and Julia find so much power and almost a sort of philosophy, something deeper in their relationship. From that fall in a note to some meetings in crowded places where they can't specifically be observed due to the crowds, to finding hideouts in fields or in the homes of the unwatched proles, the majority lower class, they do eventually grow truly close to love each other despite their connection being based solely on a moment of hope. And in that intimacy, they find their most powerful feat. Now, this is a world where sex is only for the purposes of production, a mechanical act of making more children for the party, which makes Winston's past with it quite grim. His former wife would insist on them doing so, only to hate the action and leave it as a failed, terrible, disgusting but required experience devoid of passion. He only ever had one other, a terrible experience directly driven by this forced lack of passion. Describing it in his own words, it was a prostitute he found attractive in the dark, but in the light he finds a shocked, toothless, painted expression which repulses him. He admits, though, through pain, that he went on with it anyway. And then there's Julia, someone who's had these kinds of affairs with tens of men at least. Someone who'll admit that she's seeking pleasure from under this iron fist, someone Winston describes as a rebel from the waist downwards. And in that, he finds sex not for a purpose, but for itself. Two people finding the feeling of pleasure, exploring the intersection of curves and the temporary melding of flesh, a base, almost instinctual drive to acquire something without careful logic. The thing that Big Brother hates more than anything. And this is why he thinks of it as follows. In the old days, he thought, a man looked at a girl's body and saw it was desirable, and that was the end of the story. But you could not have pure love or pure lust nowadays. No emotion was pure because everything was mixed up with fear and hatred. Their embrace had been a battle, the climax a victory. It was a blow struck against the party. It was a political act. These powerful experiences he collects with Julia are ones which shoot past the filters of thought and into feeling. He starts to get angry with her when she'll cut a meeting short for one reason or another, or not be able to make it to their next one, which is a knee-jerk reaction making no logical sense. They have to play by the rules and stay secret, or else everything is over. To deny one pleasure now is to have a lifetime of it in the future. Based on all logic, he should appreciate this careful quality of her. But he ends up finding it frustrating at that moment, almost nonsensically so, because it's a feeling he can't help. Now, how this impacts him is seen in his overall demeanor and health as well. As they set up a little domestic home for themselves in Charrington Shop, a junk seller in one of the unmonitored and extremely poor prole neighborhoods, Winston starts to describe how his life has really changed from the better from the passion they have. 4, 5, 6, 7 times they met during the month of June. Winston had dropped his habit of drinking gin at all hours. He seemed to have lost the need for it. He had grown fatter, his varicose ulcer had subsided, leaving only a brown stain above his ankle. His fits of coughing in the early morning had stopped. The process of life had ceased to be intolerable. Now, the reason is because he's actually feeling for once, experiencing life rather than life passed through the dismal, horrible filter that the party creates. It improves him because, well, it is him. His body is healing from finally achieving anything that it's been screaming for. Now, similar things can be said of the good food and drink that those two share in this place, where they start to eat black market chocolate and delighting in the real taste, not the fake stuff they've known their whole lives. And this is another inherent quality. You don't really think about whether you like a taste or not, at least not at first. It just hits your taste buds and you react. It is kind of one of the quintessential acts of feeling. And that's why Big Brother only allows such low quality and awful goods. It's so people don't have these tasteful experiences, so that they're never beholden to a pleasurable version of inherent feeling, but instead recoiling from the poor gin or gruel each time. They're literally trained to find taste inherently negative. And this is further due to the inherent individualism of flavor or passion, things like that. You don't help how you taste or who you love, right? No one wakes up and says, well, I hate chocolate now, or I decided this morning that I'm gay. These things create evidence that one is kind of inherently distinct. For example, if Winston hates the soup but Parsons loves it, then they have proof of feeling's importance, of a validity to their own mentality over Big Brother's actions. But if everyone hates the soup, then no one has that feeling, so the food is made to be awful. It's that anything which creates feeling, anything that makes that necessary feeling pleasurable, is crushed. Which is why these two play out their domestic days together, and Winston comes to believe that they can change how you think, but not how you feel. If you feel that staying human is worthwhile, then you've beaten them. When I first read 1984, I assumed it would be a panopticon situation. The system isn't actually perfect. Not everyone can truly be watched all the time, and there are no thought police, but the idea of these things creates their power. So long as one can be watched, they must behave as if it's so. After all, Winston and Julia get away with exactly the opposite of what Big Brother desires, and so it couldn't truly be perfected. Plus, it has so many obviously logic-testing faults. There's a speech that thousands of people are listening to live about how awful their enemy in the war is, and during the middle, the enemy changes. The people go crazy and tear down the banners and say it must have been the work of spies, since the current enemy has always been the enemy, and within minutes they've returned to hateful normalcy. But surely no one can truly believe this. There's a whole department of people where Winston works who have to now falsify all the records to match the new enemy. Hundreds, if not thousands of people who have seen proof that Big Brother was wrong, even if they try and believe it was a simple misprint. They're literally writing the fake stories for the papers themselves. It is deep within their minds that this is all false. And then there's the 2 minutes hate, where daily the workers are gathered to boo and yell and hiss at a screen of Goldstein and the Brotherhood, those supposed underground revolutionaries O'Brien fakes to be a part of. If Big Brother is in control of everything, why even create an enemy like this? Why have people creating the fiction they intake? Why allow two people to find passion only to capture them afterwards? The party doesn't just allow, but creates this idea for a terrible reason. Because it gives people an idea that there are others against it, a hope that they can be happy, that it can be toppled and the world changed. They know that people will hope no matter what, that there is no human without hope, and so they create it to be able to take it away. Everything which happens with Winston and Julia, with every thought criminal, is ordained in exactly as Big Brother planned. Because it is this implanted hope which makes Winston and Julia manipulatable. They take a risk on O'Brien because of this hope, a blatant act which goes against all the security they carefully abided by all this time, going directly to the home of another person without a utilitarian reason. They do so on nothing more than the idea that he's on their side, a look he and Winston might have shared some time ago before a direct conversation later. They do it because they want it to be true. They delight in the book, Goldstein's supposed revolutionary material, which teaches them what they need to know, but tells them nothing they didn't already, because they just want to feel valid in that hope. They buy into what someone else has told them about everything, something which prevents them from ever acting on their own about it, only following and never creating. All of this is a comfort which stalls them, the comfort of hope. This vague, undefined idea of hope is the worst thing for real change. And in a way, it's a mirror to Big Brother. To find comfort in logic, as surely someone must be acting against them, pleasure in thought, as of course no system is perfect, rather than change in action. Even those against Big Brother are a part of it, the things they love actually the things they hate. To act against them is to be one with them. Nothing is everything from the very start. And so in this perfected system where even dissent is carefully crafted to control, we can understand how they convince people that even the strongest feelings don't exist. They allow people to feel, but only within the bounds of what they create, so that they may steal it away and prove without a doubt that no one has ever felt a single thing. This is what happens with Winston and Julia. As we said, everything they did was ordained, including the feelings they have for each other, especially this following one, for this purpose. The only thing that matters is that we shouldn't betray one another, although even that can't make the slightest difference. If you mean confessing, she said, we shall do that right enough. Everybody always confesses. You can't help it. They torture you. I don't mean confessing. Confession is not betrayal. What you say or do doesn't matter. Only feelings matter. If they can make me stop loving you, that would be the real betrayal. They allowed him to find this expression exactly so that they could know the strongest way to break it, so that he could witness his strongest feeling be betrayed, proved less than their thoughts. This is confirmed when the pair meet with O'Brien, and he goes through a list of things they must agree to do for the revolution. You are prepared to give your lives? Yes. To commit murder? Yes. To commit acts of sabotage which may cause the deaths of hundreds of innocent people? Yes. To betray your country to foreign powers? Yes. To cheat, to forge, to blackmail, to corrupt the minds of children, to distribute habit-forming drugs, to encourage prostitution, to disseminate venereal diseases? Yes. If it would somehow serve our interest to throw sulfuric acid in a child's face, are you prepared to do that? Yes. You are prepared, the two of you, to separate and never see one another again? No, broke in Julia. It appeared to Winston that a long time passed before he answered. No, he said finally. This confirms to the party a moment of feeling, where their thoughts that they must do as the revolution asks is outweighed by an inherent expression they can't overcome, their love for each other. It proves that the trap has worked, that they felt, and that it now can be fully sprung. And so, not long after this meeting is when they are captured. However, all of this is saved for the final step of their torture. All the beatings, the bloody noses and kicked out teeth, the pools of bodily fluids and the mangled hair, all of the questioning and confessioning, everything he experienced existed only for this final moment. O'Brien asks him if there's anything left to be broken, and Winston confirms. I have not yet betrayed Julia, he said. O'Brien looked down at him thoughtfully. No, he said. No, that is perfectly true. You have not betrayed Julia. Despite everything, telling his captors everything about her and everything not, confessing that she did or didn't do anything and everything, every heinous action to exist, that they were anywhere and everywhere, and that they weren't at the same time, he hasn't betrayed his feelings for her. He still loves her. He's still wondering where she is and what her fate is. He'll still scream out for her and incur more pain on himself. They couldn't take this one thing from him, this one bit of evidence that he is not the party. But then there's Room 101, an infamous space where people are made to confront their worst fears. Winston is taken there and tied down and sees a cage with two spaces for his eyes, within those sides of it being a hungry rat each, Winston's greatest fear. It's the last thing that he can't help, an inbuilt fear that proves he is distinct, ready to be injected directly into his brain through the tearing out of his eyes. O'Brien brings the cage closer and closer, metal clicking and starving rats squealing as he explains its origins and past torture, and in Winston's desperation, under the threat of eye stalks gnawed out by disease-ridden hungry beasts, under the boot of Big Brother on his face, there is a final realization. Only an individual can be in pain. Only a man can be broken down to be less than one. If he is the last one and he ceases to be, then so does the pain. So long as he becomes the party, he is safe from those individual things he can't help, those fears, those great pains gnawing out his eyes and into his brain, because now it is someone else's brain. And so he breaks. Julia. He betrays the feeling. He begs and pleads for Julia to receive this punishment and not him, for them to do anything and everything to her rather than anything to him, for them to grind her bones to dust, to tear off her skin, anything they desire to save him. His last, most powerful feeling, a feeling written across human history as inherent and unyielding, the stuff of dreams and the matter of life, is betrayed. They took that feeling from him, or rather prove to him that he had never once felt a single thing to begin with. If he hates Big Brother, then he loves Big Brother, and he always has. If he is, then he has never been. Nothing exists but what he thinks, and what he thinks is what they think, and Winston is dead. Most chilling is that he hasn't been forced to do any of this, but rather shown he always did and didn't believe it. It isn't the pleasure to confess to what he doesn't believe, but the active awareness that he knows not what he believes. In that moment of confession, he ceases to be himself, in one of the most chilling descriptions of the process to ever be written. He was falling backwards into enormous depths away from the rats. He was still strapped in the chair, but he had fallen through the floor, through the walls of the building, through the earth, through the oceans, through the atmosphere, into outer space, into the gulfs between the stars, always away, away, away from the rats. He was light years distant, but O'Brien was still standing at his side. There was still the touch of cold wire against his cheek. But through the darkness that enveloped him, he heard another click, and knew that the cage door had clicked shut and not open. When I finished 1984, only a few hours before I was supposed to be up for work, I was in a moment of terror alone on my bedroom floor. I grasped at the curtains to let light into the lonely, dark space that was consuming me. It was one of the most true and real terror that I've ever felt. And it's because of the proof of concept that it creates, because of how thought creates reality, because of the validity it gives to the idea that happiness is merely the idea of happiness and nothing more, because of certainty only being something that we choose which defeats its very purpose. During the torture with O'Brien, he's often appearing to be reading Winston's mind, predicting exactly what he'll say or the thoughts in his mind that no one else should know. And it's never addressed if this is truly the reading of a mind, or the placement of these ideas long before through unknown mind games, or simply an extremely accurate prediction based on carefully controlled citizens and the mass collection of information. But it doesn't matter which it is. In fact, the terror is in not knowing which, in the lack of any sign which can be pointed to say which is real and which is fake, in the complete removal of context and experience, and the inability to know if what one is thinking is read or planted or predicted or anything else, because they all entail that those thoughts are not yours. Am I feeling anything, or am I only thinking what I was made to? Is even that thought simply towards the goal of a stronger power? Am I happy, or have I learned that this pain is joy? Is there anything outside of this mind, anything which can prove I really exist? It is the fact that nothing can ever truly be certain in this container of mine which is terrifying, and that Orwell did nothing to quell that fear because there is nothing which can do so. It simply is, and we exist within it. We are part of these systems, and we have no way of knowing how much they are a part of us. It could already be too late. The world could already be lost, and you and I and everything we'd experienced, seen, thought, heard could be pointless nonsense already. And that's where things stop. That's where the story ends. There is no hopeful conclusion. There is no breaking this spell. There is nothing I say here to prove that you are you and that the fight is not already lost. That's what I originally wrote, speaking of what we could learn from Winston and Julia still, from these failures of people, and all it did was ring hollow. It robbed the ending of its true value by providing some little hint of comfort for us to hide away in, like Winston and Julia did, becoming foolish and manipulatable by that ounce of hope, by the idea that somehow, somewhere, at some time, things will change, even if right now we are the dead. What we are left with is the boot stamping on the human face over and 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 over. What we are left with is proof that entire lives, which should be rich and full, are instead sacrificed for the weakness of others to persist, that the personification of fear and self-doubt are being quelled with the blood of others, that false lines in the sand designate who gets opportunity and who does not, patterns on a map which lock some into war and tragedy for every moment they'll ever see. That our lives are not our own, but are a result of people who we will never meet, who never once lived a day of what they create for us. That the worst ones get to be comfortable in a false, simulated immortality, and that the best will destroy themselves in the search for truth. That none of this is right or fair, and yet it is anyway. We witness this principle time and time again, with the innocent made into unwilling martyrs thrown upon the pyre of genocidal empires, with generations of children stricken with debilitation due to the swipe of a weak man's pen, and with those who worked so hard within their confines to have anything at all, only to have the roof they fought for collapsed in on their head by bombs. This book is a work of horror inspired by the horror stricken upon citizens so that their neighbors can rest easy and never questioning themselves for even one single minute of one single hour of one single day. The horror of a young man yet to grow old who just cast the last real ballot of his entire life. The horror of a young woman who feels herself thrust back into the 1800s just as she clawed her way to 2024. The horror of every single thing which you worked for, which you destroyed yourself mentally for within their rules, within their confines and their methods, and to feel it being pulled away, to feel the punishment inflicted upon you for having done nothing at all wrong. This is the age of horrible contradiction, the age of rising prophets on a sinking world, of life bound in slow murder, and of being unconvinced by scientific papers but fully decided based on 10-second clips. This is the age of doublethink. I won't leave you with any comfort. I will only leave you with fear, with anxiety, with anger, with every negative emotion possible which says act and resist and never give up. Never become the dead.